Talk about Bridge. So Bridge is probably not one of the programs that you're like familiar with if you know from graphics programs. It's not like a super like flashy common one that a lot of people talk about, but what makes it really handy for us is the fact that Bridge, at least last year, was free. As in, even before Adobe let you all download programs because of the whole COVID situation, anyone was able to get Bridge on their computer, and it doesn't require like a really fancy computer. It just about anything can run this, and it's really good because it's a photo organization program. It's gonna let you look at all your pictures that you've taken. And it's also the really good thing that it can do is it lets you start getting used to some slightly better photo editing and manipulating techniques than what you're probably used to from just using your phone settings. All right, so I'm obviously on a Mac here. What I've got looks probably a little bit different, but this whole interface here should be what Bridge looks like the very first time you open it up, because I've never used Bridge on this computer. Brand new computer, brand new Bridge. So the only difference if you're on a PC is that like some of these icons probably look a little bit different and they're probably not labeled the exact same. But what should act about the same is if, let's say for example, you've plugged in a flash drive that's got some pictures on it, or you've got your photos folder, that you should be able to navigate to those just fine. I have all my pictures in my external hard drive, which is this guy right here, so I'm gonna just go in that, and here's all my stuff. Here's my pictures folder, and let's go into camera photos, and sure, I'm just gonna go for let's do Disney. Why not? All right. So I've got a bunch of pictures in here. Tons and tons and tons of pictures. Right now, though, this isn't really like a great way to browse these pictures. So what I'm going to do is like change a couple things with this interface to make this a little bit more user-friendly for not just for me looking at these pictures, but also for just being able to like look at this a little bit better. Okay. So I'm going to put my mouse right here on one of these dividing lines, and you can see it went from being a mouse to being this little brackety arrow thing. I'm going to take this and click and drag this over. Over. There we go. Because those menus on the left just do not need to be that big. All right. Then I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. I'm going to do the same thing, come to like one of these little dividing bars, click and hold on it, and drag that over. I'm just changing my interface. Now you can do whatever you want here as far as how you prefer it. I'm just doing what I particularly like. All right, I'm gonna click on a picture, and there's where it's a preview, and here's already where Bridge is great, because this picture looked okay when it was small. Now when I look at it, it's a big blurry mess. So we're just gonna kind of go through these till we find something decent for us to work with that will allow us to mess around with our settings in here. All right, I'm just looking for, okay, sure, let's go for this gorilla. So if you want to check if a picture is like really in focus, you can kind of narrow in there a little bit better. This is in pretty decent focus for at least what we're doing right now. Okay, so we got this gorilla, and what I want to do is mess around with this picture some more, because looking at this picture, it's like really bright. I can probably go in and make this a slightly better looking image. So what I'm going to do is I right-clicked on it, and I want to say open in camera raw. Now camera raw, okay, this is probably what will happen if you've never gone into it before. So I'm going to tell it I want, let's see, sure, ACR default. I don't even know what that means. We're going to find out together. All right, so it's telling me all this stuff. I'm like, okay, let's go. And so here's my picture, and it's probably getting cropped off because my monitor is gigantic. There we go. Okay, so the settings are still the same for those of you guys who have used Bridge before, from my MediaArt 2 type folks. It's just in a slightly different organization here. So all of these sliders all do different things, obviously. These are all like the main ones we're going to look at right now, and honestly the best way to see what these do is just take one of the sliders and just like go up, go down with it. So let's say if I look at this picture, I want it to be a little bit warmer, so let's go for that, but I still want to keep those greens some. Notice I'm not making like huge changes here. Now if you wanted to like, hard fry these pictures, that depends on what you want to do with them. So temperature and tint are sort of like your overall color. It's just gonna change kind of like what time of day it looks like, and if it's warm or cool. All right, exposure. Exposure is how much light was let into the camera, so I can pretend like I took a terrible picture in either direction, either way too dark or way too light. But the nice thing is this picture in its original form was slightly overexposed, so I can actually bring that down a little bit, and it's going to be better than it was before. I'm going to go a little bit further down. Okay, so what that did actually is it just sort of let me get some shadows and lights back in some of those over bright areas. All right, contrast is your difference between your darks and lights. If you turn your contrast up, what you can always do is look at this graph up here to kind of get you a visual on what's going on. Contrast pushes your lights lighter and your darks darker. If you turn it up, if you turn it down, it does the opposite. It's gonna like kind of gray everything out. So watch that graph up top there and you can see that happening. The lights and darks are pushed to the edges if I go up. Everything kind of goes to the middle if I go this way. I'm actually going to turn this contrast down a little bit because I want to try to get some of these shaded areas both in the background and on the gorilla to show up a little bit better. All right, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks all affect like the lightest and darkest areas here. Basically what highlights is going to do, this isn't a great picture for it, but what you can do is if you look at like these really, really bright areas here and here, if I turn that highlight down, I actually start getting some definition back in there. Versus if I turn that up, it's going to like nuke those and make them super bright. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to lower those a little bit just to make those less intensely bright. Shadows, what's really going to, this is probably why I chose this picture subconsciously, is these shadows, especially like in the hair and the fur around here. If I turn these shadows up, I can actually kind of bring out some dark areas there. This is really handy if you take a picture, let's say like you're inside, or like in a car or something like that. If you have a picture that like looks really dark, sometimes you can take that shadow slider and just you can recover like a whole lot of information. I'll do this with another picture that'll probably be a better example for that in a second. All right, whites is going to do very similar to highlights. Again, if you look at an area like this, as I turn that up, it's like frying it. If I turn it down, it's, you know, making a lot more definition. I'm just going to probably leave that about where it was originally. And then blacks is going to do similar to what shadows did, but instead of it only affecting the very darkest areas, it's going to actually affect like the whole picture, which I think you can see a little bit here. So I'm actually going to turn that down a little bit because I like to get some contrast back in there. All right, texture and clarity. These have a lot to do with like some of those, like a lot of filters, like automatic filters on Instagram and stuff like that, really play with things like texture and clarity. Like if you want that like really grungy look, you turn that texture up. If you want like that soft focus, really like making everything a little bit blurrier, you turn that down. For something like this, it's like a nature picture. I'm going to turn that texture up a little bit. I want to kind of bring in some of this stuff that we're seeing here. Clarity is similar. You can really fry a picture hard with that. So I'm just going to go in there and just give it a little bit of clarity. Dehaze, honestly, is like kind of, I don't know, I've never really used dehaze. It sort of is a combination of clarity and light. All right, finally, we got vibrance and saturation. These are your colors. If you want to make your picture a black and white picture, you go into the saturation slider and you just turn that thing all the way down. Now, notice now that I've turned it down, this is a very different picture now versus if I have that color on versus off. The contrast between the green and the black is like a lot more noticeable than if I turn this all the way down. So if I made this into a black and white picture, I'd probably want to go back up in some of these and mess around with some things. Primarily, I'd probably want to like bring my blacks back down some and maybe bring my shadows back down some just to get them to be a little bit darker there. All right, but I'm going to leave it in color for right now, somewhere right around there. All right, so lastly, cropping. So cropping is something I usually don't do this in Bridge, but it is something that can help you really concentrate your picture. And right now it's on what's called the rule of thirds, which is a great compositional device for just in photography in general. People mention the rule of thirds all the time when you first get started in photography. Some people are like, oh, it's so cliche, but it's a great place to start. The main thing with the rule of thirds is you want to have your subject matter on the lines. Now, I have this, like, I mean, he's the center of focus here, but I want to make sure that his face is like kind of right on one of these cross sections there. So I like how that's looking. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And I've got this picture looking the way I want it to now. Critical thing here. I need to now save this. So after some fumbling around there, I figured out how to save this as a JPEG. Sorry about that. So this button right here, this is what we want. We're going to click on this. And right now it says preset custom, which I don't want. I want to just save this as a JPEG. So I click on preset and I put it on save as JPEG. And I'm just going to ignore all this. Usually all these presets are going to be pretty good for what I want. I am going to save it to a different folder though. So I'm going to click on select folder. I'm just going to stick it on my desktop. And we'll say select. And let's give it, okay, so we'll say save. And hopefully what that should do now is, there we go. Okay, so let me kind of scooch this out of the way so you guys can see what's going on here. All right, so I've saved 2 versions of it to my desktop. So here is the one, here's like the before picture. And here's the after. All right, that's 2 very different pictures there. As you can see, it's like we've got a lot more definition. The color's amplified. It's just we made a lot of overall changes to it that really helped the whole thing out. Let me see if I can make them both a little bit smaller here. There we go. Okay, that gives you a pretty good idea of what Bridge can do there. Sorry about how sloppy that got there. Like I said, I'm sort of opening up these programs at the same time as you all.